Is that right? Okay. Oh, my computer. There. Okay. Better? Better. Okay. Sorry, we're all on a learning curve here. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Wheelchair Repair Task Force. My name is Beverly Brakeman. I'm chairing, and I want to thank everybody for being here this morning and participating in this really important initiative. So before we get right into the meeting, I think we have minutes. Whoops. We have minutes from the last meeting that were sent out to everybody. Did everybody get those minutes? Yes. So I think we should just, yeah. Can somebody make a motion to approve? Thank you. A second? Second. Any,
Yeah, I lost audio from the chamber.
Yeah, there's no audio from the meeting.
is that better? Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Okay, sorry about that. Okay. I wanted to sort of say that what I'd like to do by the end of this meeting is sort of identify next meeting so that people sort of know what to expect as we move forward. This is a really big group and a lot of very important discussions. So I want everybody to be I welcome the feedback around the process and want to be really open about that. So I thought what we would do today is I just wanted to kind of reiterate our charge under the statute, which is really to study the minimum standards for timely repair of complex rehabilitation technology, including but not limited to improving timelines for assessment and repair of technology by a manufacturer or service provider upon notification from a consumer about the need for repairs. And then within that, there's 5 sort of specific areas that we can look at to get to that place. And so I just wanted to sort of put that out there. The way we decided sort of as a group and was to start with the consumer priorities. Those priorities were based on feedback that the consumers have received from people in the industry who use complex rehabilitation technology. And I think a lot of the consumer priorities have to do with assessing and the repairs and timeliness within the industry. And then we also can and should think about this for future meetings, find out or have a discussion about what other states are doing. But for now, how I thought we would proceed is we have the consumer priority document. You guys have your own now. And there were 4 areas where both the industry and the consumers agreed. And that was number 16, 17, 18, 19, and then 20, some further discussion needed. So what I thought would make the most sense to kind of have substantive and meaningful discussions and also time to have these discussions would be that we would take the priorities sort of one by one, try and get through 3 or 4 today, maybe more if we can, and talk about where we can find common ground. Because at the end of the day, what we really want is to have some common ground on how we can move forward on increasing independence, quality of life, and mobility for people who live in wheelchairs. So does that make sense to everybody in terms of a way to move forward? Or not make sense to anybody? It's probably easier if there's people that have any. Okay. All right. So the first consumer priority was CRT equipment providers must offer in-home repair services for products they provide. So I don't, if the industry has indicated they needed further discussion, I know you all are discussing that. I don't know if the why don't we go, if the consumers want to explain that at all, or if the industry wants to respond, let's start there.
Sure. I'm happy to explain that further and answer any questions. And I also just want to say I'm really grateful for the industry for indicating, for commenting on all the priorities. And so, point number one, we really believe that in-home repair services are essential. I know that there's been a trend towards in-shop repairs, and as a group of consumers, we support in-shop repairs. I mean, we think that's a valuable option, but we think that consumers need to be protected in that in-home repairs be a guaranteed service, especially in a situation where someone's main mode of personal transportation, daily transportation around the home, their ability to even get from their bed to their car is in jeopardy, and they may be living alone. They may not have caregivers. They may not have the community support they need to get to a shop. And so we really believe that the industry as a whole, and especially as it operates in Connecticut, needs to commit to in-home repair services and also see this as a protection. You wouldn't want your competitors to scrap in-home repair services and offer only in-shop repair services and maybe, save some money on that, but, you're still offering a more extensive service and not getting what you need from it. We really need everyone to be playing by the same rules in Connecticut. And that's what we're requesting for point number one.
Okay, thanks, Jonathan. I have actually one clarifying question that I would like to hear from the industry on that. You say that it must offer in-home repair services. I assume that means that you're saying when people need that, but not every repair being in-home. That's
correct.
Okay. All right. Okay. So folks from the industry, do you want to remark, comment, question? And keep in mind, we may need more data. We may need more information. So anyway, yes, Representative Case.
Thank you, Beverly. And just to clarify on some things, because some stuff we need to look at and work through here. And Jonathan, thank you for, we agree with you in having stuff done at home. It's how we get there, and it shouldn't be a how, it should be when. But we have to take in consideration that there's state insurance, there's private insurance, and then the insurance covers. And the question that came up to me in a conversation was, the state of Connecticut has their own policy, and they're self-insured. Do we cover repairs going forward as they do now, as we want the Medicare and Medicaid to cover? Does anybody know that answer?
Representative Case, this is Wayne Grau. If I can address that. The state of Connecticut does cover repairs, but there's a whole process to repairs. And first of all, I need to apologize, folks. I'm traveling. Unfortunately, I dropped my computer. That's why my camera's not on. So please accept my apology for that. The state of Connecticut does cover the repair. They recover the actual wrench time. They do not cover travel to the consumer's home. They do not cover the evaluation time to go ahead and assess what that repair could be. And that could be sometimes up to 30, 45 minutes, because we have to run down, all the different issues. We don't just look at a symptom. We try to find out why that symptom is happening. But they do cover the part, and they cover the wrench time to actually fix that. Now, I will tell you, on a number of parts, due to inflation and some other things, the actual fee schedule is below cost of what the part is. So
my question to you is, you say state, is that DSS or is that the Connecticut Employees medical plan? Because you have 40,000 people on the state medical plan.
I'm only
informed that it's self-insured, which is the larger majority of people, and then there's private insured, and then there's the DSS state plan.
I was only addressing the issue with, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but I'm only addressing the difference with Medicaid. Gary Gilberti from the motion has his hand up. He may be able to add some additional insight into this.
I
Gary?
just want to make sure that whatever we're doing now, that we can learn from somebody else, because there's 3 different types of insurance within Connecticut. And those are the 3 that I've been made aware of. And the largest pool are corporations, and including the state of Connecticut, that are self-insured.
I believe it. We're discussing the DSS program, and kind of what the reimbursement looks like through there. And that's to answer your question there.
So he cut out, but when we talked about this, we wanted to make sure that everybody had the ability to get their chairs repaired, and not just people through DSS and through those payments. So we were looking at the amount of people, which we can get the numbers from the insurance industry, how many are on private insurance, how many are on self-insurance, and how many are on Medicare or Medicaid.
Representative Case, all insurance companies and payers do, that I'm aware of in the state of Connecticut, do cover repairs. Okay. I'm not aware of any that, as I said before, cover the travel time or the evaluation time. They just cover the labor to actually do the wrench time and also the repair parts.
Okay, so that answers my question. Thank you, Madam Chair, because none of the 3 cover travel time as of yet, from what I'm understanding.
Yes, sir. I'm not aware of any that cover travel time.
So I think that's one big thing that we really have to put at the top of the priority, because the getting repaired at home and the evaluation is one of the big things, because that puts the ease on the consumer that things are in the works. So I think that should be one bullet point that we really need to look at and see how we're going to accomplish that.
Great, thanks,
Okay.
Representative Case, and Chandra's keeping great minutes, so we'll keep track of that. Thank you. So actually, Susan Halpin, you had your hand up, so why don't you go ahead?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. And just a quick hello to everybody that's on the call today. I'm Susan Halpin. I act as the Executive Director for the Connecticut Association of Health Plans. That is Aetna, Anthem, Cigna, Connecticut, and United Health Plans. And I just wanted to echo a couple of the things that Representative Case said about the market, because I think as we discuss all of these issues, it's really important to understand what Connecticut does have the authority to regulate and what they do not. There's about 3.6 million people in Connecticut. About 1 million of those are covered by Medicaid, which you all are referring to as the DSS, or Department of Social Services group. There is about under 1 million, I would say some of the latest figures I've said, which is about 799,000 to 800,000 are covered by Medicare. And Medicare, the rules and regs are set by the federal government. So the Connecticut legislature would not have any ability to regulate that market. Then you move on to the commercial market. And the commercial market, as Representative Case indicated, is split up in 2. One is the self-insured market, which is again governed under ERISA by the federal government. So any benefit mandates, et cetera, would have to be addressed through ERISA and through the feds. The last pool is the fully insured market. That is what is subject to Connecticut state law and to the authority of the Department of Insurance and the legislature in terms of mandates. That really has 3 segments. One is the individual market, the largest of which is the Affordable Care Act's Health Insurance Exchange, which probably most of you are familiar with, where you can go and select among a menu of plans through Access Health CT if you are an individual and purchase a plan and get subsidized by the federal government. Then there is the small group market, which is those employers with under 50 employees, and that is also fully insured. That means that the health plan takes the risk. So the premiums may be higher because you're paying under a self-insured, I'm sorry, under a fully insured plan for predictability of rates. You're not going to see any high highs, any low lows. You're going to be paying one rate for your health insurance. Then the majority of the market at this point, about 75% of the commercial market is fully insured. I mean, sorry, self-insured. Excuse me. I had surgery yesterday. So my brain is a little foggy. If you just bear with me, I'm on some good painkillers. The self-insured market is about 75% of the commercial market. And again, those folks are subject to ERISA law. And that means the employer is paying its own claims and just hiring a health plan to administer the benefit that they create. So, you know, let's just say Susan Helpin Incorporated, you know, has 100 employees. My claims last year were around $2 million. I'm going to put $2 million into a bank account that Anthem can reach into and pay my claims. And I'm going to come up with the benefit package for my employees that is consistent with ERISA. But Susan Helpin Incorporated is the one that creates the benefit package in line with federal rules and regulations. So if you break this all down, the state of Connecticut only has jurisdiction over about 13% of the total population on the commercial side. And then Medicaid is the largest population that the state has authority for, and that's around 1 million members. So just as we have these conversations, I just want to make sure people, you know, understand, you know, as you go forward with mandates, who they would actually apply to, and who it would be elective for them to pick up, say, you know, having wheelchairs fixed in the home. You could pass that mandate on the fully insured, you could pass that mandate on Medicaid, but really the majority of the population, you cannot pass that mandate on. They would have to elect to take it up, or it would have to be dictated by the federal government. So just wanted to make sure that people had that understanding. As far as mandates go, you know, the health plans can provide them, but there is a cost associated with those. And if many of you are probably aware of the pretty contentious rate hearings that just took place under the Department of Insurance's authority, and, you know, between utilization, trend, and mandates, those rates are going up every year. So in the context of this conversation, there are lots of laudable mandates that are proposed every year at the legislature. It's not a commentary on whether they're better healthcare or better policy. They may in fact be, but I think we all have to recognize that there's a cost associated with that. And we have to recognize that sustainability of affordable healthcare is got to be paramount as well, because if you can't afford the health insurance, you won't have any benefits covered. So just wanted to give a little bit of the lay of the land as the conversation continues. And please know that that is not without sensitivity to the issues at hand. I did listen to the last meeting and completely appreciate the conversations that have been had and the issues raised. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Susan. That was pretty good for having just had surgery, actually. Very instructive. And for our next meeting, October 4th, we have asked both DSS and the insurance industry to do a more in-depth presentation around CRT users and payer status in the state. But that was very helpful. Susan, one question I have, and then I know, Gary, is your hand still up from before, or did you have another?
Yeah, I just quickly wanted to clarify on this first point, because our company was one of the ones that was mandating in-shop repair as opposed to in-home for a certain subcategory of users. We have since backed off of that, and while we offer in-shop and we encourage in-shop, we still do go to people's homes. I just want to clarify that.
Okay, thanks, Gary. And then I
And
see,
one other thing, Madam Chair, that I just wanted to add that I forgot to, is as these conversations continue, the group may want to extend an invite to both the exchange and to the employer community and potentially to the Office of Health Strategies as well to sit at the table, because all three of those folks are really tied to these issues and the cost of healthcare as well. So it might make sense to include them in any future meetings.
okay, thank you, Susan. Representative Case, go ahead.
No, and that was great stuff, Susan. I thank you. I just think that when we pulled this together, we want to make sure that we're all inclusive and that we cover everybody. And just leaving some certain pools out, it was shocking to me to learn that the biggest amount of insured are self-insured, and the smaller ones are the ones that the state handles. So I just want to make sure that we work on this not only on the state level, the insurance committee level, the federal level, so that whatever we do, we're all inclusive so that nobody's left behind. And that's should be one of our main goals. So thank you.
Thank you, Representative Case. And I just had one question for Susan, and then I see Jonathan and Wayne have their hands. But Susan, I'm not an insurance expert by any means, but in my past experience, or maybe this is a question for you when you do your presentation, but my experience is that most self-insured plans tend to follow suit with what the fully insured mandates are. And I would be interested to know if that is correct, or if there's a percentage or whatever, but at least if memory serves me, that seems to be a trend where if a mandate is passed, the self-insured companies do it because it's better to have the consistency, and it's frankly better, given that most of these plans come through their employers, it's better to have all people in Connecticut getting the same insurance coverage.
Certainly they pick up many, but definitely not all. And I think a lot of times it has to do with the population that they serve as employers and what their own population, looks like. But I think the point is it will be up to them to elect to take up any new mandates. And so again, I think that's a good reason to have the employer community, at the table, listening to this discussion in the same way that I am and everyone else is, at the table, because ultimately it will be their decision.
Okay, thanks, Susan. Jonathan, you had your hand up, and then Wayne.
Yeah, well, thank you, Susan, for sharing that information with us. And I also just want to emphasize that our point number one is targeted at the equipment providers. It's not making a mandate on insurance policy. And as it stands currently, CRT equipment providers, New Motion and National Seating and Mobility are providing in-home service repairs. So this is not a demand for something new, to be clear. This is just a protection because we know that the trend is leaning in the opposite direction for both, for primarily, I think, financial reasons, efficiency reasons, and we want to make sure that that is protected, that the status quo is protected, and that those in-home repairs remains an option, and also just as importantly, at the discretion of the consumer, based on the needs of the consumer. And we are very much aware of, the landscape in terms of reimbursements, and that's why our other points include asking for insurance companies to cover those things like travel costs, et cetera. So we appreciate that. And, I had some questions related to this for the industry. And I don't know if anyone knows, but how many technicians do you currently employ in Connecticut, New Motion and National Seating for in-home versus shop repairs? I don't know if anyone has that. I think a number was mentioned last time, but I just want to get clarity on that.
Before we go into questions, I'd like to, there's a couple people that have their hands up on the issue.
Sure, of course.
So I'll go back to you, but Senator Seminara and I see Wayne, and then we can go back to questions. I just want to get clarity on the issue.
So we need to clarify what exactly is meant by in-home repair services. When you, and Jonathan, I guess my question, are you looking for it to be mandated? Are you looking for it to be offered? And then I think we also need to look at what exactly we're talking about here, because what you might deem as a priority as a mandated or offered service in home might be different from the industry. So I'm looking to try to nail down some specifics if we can in the discussions further.
Sure. So I would define offer in-home repair services, meaning at the consumer's discretion and or according to their needs and the nature of the repair, a CRT provider must have a service available to provide assessments and repairs in the consumer's home. And that is currently how it stands. That is the status quo. That is how it has been in Connecticut for decades, and that's how it currently is today. So we're not proposing anything new. We just want that current practice protected.
So you're saying a repair is done in the home at the consumer's discretion currently?
Yes, like if I break my front caster and I need a new one, I can call up and order that new caster and have that scheduled, and they will come out with a technician and repair that caster in my home currently.
That is happening currently.
Yes, that is happening currently. The issue is one, the timeliness. You know, this is a 3-4 month process for many people. And we are also looking ahead to the trend where in-home repair services are being deprioritized. So that's why we want this current practice protected.
Can I, Beverly, can I address some of that real quick?
Yes, Wayne, go ahead.
Okay, so first of all, Janet, thank you. You're absolutely right. Presently, and since the inception of the industry, we've always offered in the home service. There's just a certain subsection of consumers that unfortunately cannot get to our location. But things have also changed. I mean, you mentioned something about cost savings and some other things. You know, we want to offer up different avenues for consumers to go ahead and get their repair for all consumers. What may work for one may not work for another. There are many different options to consumers to choose from. And, you know, we want to give them that option to get the equipment repaired. We really want to encourage consumers to utilize technology and in location repairs because it's really about speed. Okay. We can get more repairs done quicker through technology. For instance, we can literally, you know, FaceTime in with somebody to evaluate the chair. In a number of instances, we're able to address that repair right away over the phone. It may be something very simple, okay? And that eliminates the downtime for the consumer, and it also eliminates the time we would have to go out there and repair that. The second quickest option is to have the consumer come into our locations for repairs. In some instances, we can offer same-day service if the consumer needs it. I don't know, if we would eliminate prior authorization, I realize that's another one. A consumer can come in and that same day if they have transportation, okay, whether it's their own transportation or if the state deems to go ahead and expand the non-medical transportation, they could come in literally the same day and get that done, okay? The longest option, unfortunately, is for the consumer is if we have to go to everybody's home. We understand that. We have to do that. And we're going to continue. And I've never heard of a trend of where we're eliminating completely in the home. We just can't do that. Okay. It's just not the right thing to do. Okay. We just want to offer these other avenues because they are quicker. Because if a person calls us and we have a backlog of, let's say, a week, we can't just bump another person, say, well, we've got to go do this one. Okay. That's not equitable. Okay. So again, we do want to continue to offer this. We won't. We just really want to encourage and offer other avenues so we can get it done quicker, because that's, correct me if I'm wrong, that's really what it's about. Consumers want to get their equipment repaired as fast as possible. So.
Thanks, Wayne. I see Jonathan, you have your hand.
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate that, Wayne, and consumers are all for technology. And the point number one does not mean that we are saying you can only do in-person assessments or any of that. We love virtual assessments, but not everyone has access to a smartphone. I have a car, but not everyone has access to a car, or easy capability of driving an hour to a shop. But we do believe this is an important point to support, and it sounds like everyone's supporting it. But as we mentioned before, just this spring, New Motion passed a new policy that we rallied against, and that was luckily changed. But that policy was to require in-shop repair for scooters and Group 2 power wheelchairs that they were currently selling. So this point is very important because it would prevent further harmful instances like that, where a CRT provider is currently selling a product but are not offering in-home repairs for those. And that can be life-threatening. It can be very detrimental to people who need a repair and cannot easily get out of the home.
Okay, Jonathan, I'm going to respond to that. So I think it's important. I know that that was put out this summer, but it was retracted. And I know that probably, in my mind, heightened people's anxiety about that's a direction in which the industry wants to go. But I think what we should focus on was that the industry put that out. It was retracted because they recognized that that probably was an unreasonable direction in which to go. So I think we should stay focused on that they retracted it and that we're working in a direction to try and improve it. So, and the other thing that I wanted to add to this discussion, I think you are correct. I think everybody is on the same page, meaning that there's no discussion saying that anybody is going to not offer in-home services. You say you get them now. The industry has reassured us that we're going to continue in that direction. But I think the focus should be on the timeliness of it. Am I correct? Is that where we need to focus on right now?
I mean, absolutely, the time is an issue. But as I said, I think this is an easy point for us all to agree. I don't think there needs to be much discussion on this point. If we all agree to this, who in here opposes that we should guarantee in-home repair services for CRT products that providers provide?
Okay, I agree with you, Jonathan. I think everybody's in agreement with timeliness and I hear also cost being issues. So I think we can all sort of move on from number one and say that we are all in agreement with that. I think the issue which is going to come up in further down is the timeliness of that, how the industry is able to do that within a shorter window of time, so consumers are not left without their mobility. And I also hear a lot of, I think this is going to come down to how these repairs and, the repairs and the parts are paid for, but not the travel and the assessment, which are very, very key pieces to this also. So, but before we move to number two, I know Jonathan Slifka had a hand up and Gary Giliberti, and then we'll move on.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a question for the industry with respect to timeliness, because I think this is one of the issues that many wheelchair users come across is things that rise to the level of an emergency. And my question for the industry is what are those items? Anecdotally, a friend of mine ordered a new joystick a couple of months ago for his power chair. He's still waiting for that. And in the interim, he has had a reading come across his chair that says bad joystick. It was happening a couple months ago. And a few days ago, his chair died at the office. And it magically started working again about an hour later, but clearly there's an issue. And when he reached out to the vendor, they said, well, your joystick's on order. There's really nothing that we can do for you until this comes in. This is clearly an emergent situation. And so I just wanted to hear the industry speak to that on what things they deem rise to the level of an emergency, because I think that conversation needs to happen too, what the industry deems an emergency and what consumers deem an emergency. So that's my question. I just like a response from the industry on that, if we could.
Great.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's a very good question, Jonathan. So Gary, you had your hand up. Why don't you go ahead? Maybe you can,
Yeah, absolutely. That and I was going to address this anyway, so that's perfect timing. Look, a lot of things contribute to the timeliness issue. One being, in a lot of cases, we have to get prior authorization in order to provide service, and that takes a good bit of time in some cases. And in this case, where the consumer is what we call a hard down, where their chair is broken, we do everything we can. And a lot of times when they call in same day, we can try and get a tech out with either a piece of loaner equipment or a loaner joystick or what have you to get that consumer back up and running. Sometimes we are at the mercy of supply chain. And through COVID, that was a huge issue. We ran into issues in getting, for one manufacturer, joysticks. We had 150 orders across the country where we could not get joysticks, and we did not have them available at all. So, we're trying our best to take care of customers as quickly as we can. It's just there are some other factors involved. We, as Wayne spoke to earlier, have a process where if the consumer calls in, we can visually assess the chair if they do have the right kind of phone. And unfortunately, not everybody has that technology, but we do provide that service where we sometimes can fix the issue remotely. And if there's a specific error code, we can sometimes, resolve that quickly. But yeah, there are a number of factors that drive the timeliness. And again, to speak to an earlier topic here about, providing in-home repair, again, a lot of it's going to come down to resources and reimbursement.
Yeah.
I would just like to address that question, or I have a question, Gary, that, you're saying during COVID, as far as I'm concerned, COVID is over at this point.
Right.
So I'm asking you now, in this particular situation that John Slifka presented, you're talking about somebody who asked for a joystick or requested a joystick months ago, months. So I guess what I'm trying to get at from you is, are we still at a point with the chain supply that we have a shortage of joysticks, or what is the issue to getting? And I'm sure John Slifka's friend is not alone, is my point. I'm sure there's
Right.
other people in the community who are being affected by this. So I guess my question to you at this point is, are we still in a chain supply issue, or is there something else going on that we need to take a look at?
Supply chain is still not 100%. It is much better, but there are still shortages of some items. Relative to Mr. Slifka's friend, if it's one of our customers, I'm happy to look at the individual situation and try and figure out what really is going on. We generally, if we can, provide a loaner product. And if somebody is a hard down, we do everything we can to take care of them that day. But, you know, again, sometimes we don't have that exact device available. And we will even a lot of times next day air in product at our own expense to try and take care of a customer. Sometimes we try and shortcut the approval process to try and help that out. But I can't speak to this specific case. If I had more information, I'd be happy to look into it.
Well, again, I think I'm not trying to be persistent here, but I don't think we're answering the question. So the question for me is, are there particular products currently that there are chain supply issues on, or is it more that or is it more that there's an issue with catching up with requests that have been made?
Well, I mean, it's a combination of both those. I mean, we do have a backlog that was relative to supply chain issues. We also had a backlog that's relative to service staff availability. You know, we had a tough time hiring techs through COVID. It's now getting better. We're now getting caught up. We still have 30 openings across the country. But yeah, it is a combination of things. And we can now get most of those products, and we are trying to get caught up on them.
Well, where are we in the state of Connecticut? Where are we here, right here in Connecticut? Do we have any openings that are not filled?
I have one, and we have full staff is 6 for us, and I have one opening, which isn't significant. Delay here would probably be just us getting caught up, or you know. And again, this is one case. I'm happy to look into it if it's one of our customers. But you know, I can tell you that in general, we do everything we can to make sure that if somebody is in a we call this a hard down. If they're in a hard down situation, we try and get them up and running.
Okay, I guess my issue is this isn't one case. It is one case that was fortunately brought to our attention by somebody who's in this committee. But I can assure you that this is not one case. This happens consistently, time after time, for far before the issue of COVID and backlogs and chain. I live it. I breathe it. I have a child who's now an adult, but she has a chair. And I can tell you that this not timely repairs is not just a result of COVID and backlogs. We're talking about something that has taken years and years and years. It hasn't been resolved. And that's why this task force has been put together to resolve it. And for you to say to me, or to say to all of us, I should say, that, you know, we try to do it. I recognize you try to do it, but what needs to happen to make it get done? That's my question. What do we need to do here and talk about that is really going to make a significant difference for these people who obviously, I implore you to think about, and I know you do think about it because you're in this business, and I know you're in the business to help people. So please don't misunderstand me. I don't think you're not trying to be helpful. But what I'm saying is, you and I get up every day and we use our legs to go walk and accomplish everything that needs to get accomplished in a day's time. But you're talking about people whose legs are the wheels of a chair. And if their chair isn't available to them, in this situation, a simple joystick is not available to them. So if they don't have their chair, which is essentially their legs, they are stuck. And sometimes stuck in their houses, sometimes stuck in their beds. So we need to do something now. Like, we need to come up with solutions now. Do we have to put somebody, do you need to to maybe hire somebody that specifically just looks at this, looks at what is in your backlog and how to get out of it? I'm not exactly sure what the answer is, but I'm saying we have been tasked to come up with the answers. So I don't want to hear from people that that this isn't something that we can do.
Senator, I apologize. I'm not trying to tell you that we can't do this. I'm actually supportive of what we're doing here. I've been in this industry over 38 years, and I'm in the industry to help people. And I've stayed here that long because of that. And this is a bigger issue than just Connecticut. Repair has been broken for many years, and a lot of it is the economic environment that we're trying to have enough people and enough resources to go ahead and do this the right way. And I'm not going to blame Connecticut or any state or even the federal government, but it's just economically it has gotten tougher. And the reason we implemented the in-shop service was to take care of more people more quickly. We have cut our backlog significantly in the last 3 or 4 months. We have put people in charge of just this specific issue just to help us get better. I am not, none of the things you're telling me are surprises or things that I take lightly. We as a company are committed to making this better.
Okay, thanks, Gary. I know there's a number of people with their hands up and I want to get to you, but I know Rep. Case has a specific question about this.
Just so going back to it and hopefully the consumers can answer. What was the situation prior to the pandemic? Were we not having timely repairs? Because I know being in a service business, we go into businesses and homes and we can't get parts, but it wasn't like that prior to the pandemic. What was it like prior to the pandemic? And are we just trying to catch up and get out of the pandemic before the cliff hits?
I'm happy to answer if the industry wants to.
I mean,
Go ahead, John.
Sorry.
Actually, no,
consumer-
Jonathan, there are people who have their hands up, so I'd like to, this was a question to the industry, so I'd like them to answer, and then I'd like to go to people with their hands up.
Yep.
Okay,
Dan,
I'm just
industry
I'm
wanna
going to go
answer
ahead and
that?
answer quickly. I'm going to go ahead and answer quickly. It was much better prior to the pandemic, but it was not perfect. We still have delays while we wait for authorizations and things like that. We generally, in cases where it is an emergency, we would go ahead and do the repair without authorization and chase that down. But it was better before the pandemic.
I'd like to just say, excuse me, folks, I'd like to address that as well. The majority of the components, unfortunately, are also made overseas. So there's a long time on that. Prior to the pandemic, I think every business looked at things and tried to streamline their supply chains, and they kept them rather thin. Okay, at that point, it was just normal business practice. And Representative Case, you probably saw this in your business as well. So that caused sometimes a little bit of a delay. But as Gary said, there are other factors that we've talked about in previous meetings, prior auth being one, and some other things that have would cause delays. Were they as much as today? No. Part of the issue too is Senator Seminara, you had mentioned the issue of, are we still having supply chain issues? I speak to a lot of the manufacturers, and I think Seth Johnson from Quantum will also address this as well. There are still supply chain issues. There's plastic resin shortages. Microchips are still short. Okay. There's a number of things. Steel. I mean, simple things like that you would think are easy. I was recently at a manufacturer and noticed that there was about 80 chairs sitting over in the corner. And I just asked, and they're like, we're waiting for parts. We just don't have the parts. So unfortunately, we're still dealing with it. We're still in a catch-up mode. Also on the loaners, a lot of the companies like NewMotion, NSM went to their loaner fleet and cannibalized those parts to get those hard down consumers backing up. And that's why, in a way, loaner fleets also have to be replenished as well. So I just wanted to address that issue, Senator.
Okay, thank you. I think, I do want to sort of move this on to the other, so another priority, so we can get more in, but there are a number of people with their hands up to talk about this first priority. So Michelle Dupree, you've had your hand up for a while.
Yeah, I just was wondering if there is any data on the remote support calls and their success rate, because I've had several of those over the years and have found them unhelpful. I know the industry keeps referencing those remote support calls as a way to address repair issues. But I have no idea what the success rate is on those and whether we should even be considering them. Thank you.
Michelle, what
Yeah.
would you, just to clarify the question in terms of what would be success rate for you that the assessment is done and the party's gotten? Like what's the data specifically that would be helpful? That you're
Well,
asking?
that somebody can repair their chair themselves in their home through a tech support call. I mean, I've heard some of the industry representatives reference that service several times, and I haven't heard anybody have any success with that. And so I'm wondering if we should just dismiss that as a relevant topic here and really stick to the in-service calls, because like I said, I've not heard that they've been successful for anybody.
Yeah, we do have a lot of successful remote calls, and the biggest thing, yeah, there are cases where we cannot fix this issue right away, but a lot of times it narrows down what the problem is, and then we can identify what parts we need, and sometimes it saves instead of two trips out, it makes one trip out, and that's the bigger savings there as for both the consumer and for us. But I'm not going to tell you it's 100% accurate.
I mean, that's anecdotal. I would want like a hard number.
I have numbers. I don't have them in front of me. I'm sorry, but we do track that. Yes, we do.
Okay, that would be something maybe, Gary, you could provide for the next meeting. So that would be great. Let's see. I think was Sheldon net? I feel like other people had their hand up, but I guess Sheldon and then Jonathan, Seth, and Melissa, and then we're going to move on.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. So I'm responding to a couple of comments and questions from Senator Seminara. And this is also in the question of my first suggestion is in the form of questions because of what was just asked. We've been hearing now for a while about supply chain and prior auth as being, the reasons for delay, or a big part of the reasons for delay. I think would be really, really helpful is if we can get hard data, just as asked, on average, how long does it take until the repair after prior authorization is obtained? And ditto, how long on average does it take for the repair to be done after the part has arrived? We can end these long discussions where those excuses are thrown out if we take that out of the equation by getting hard data on delays after those two issues have been taken care of. But what I really want to address is this thing about text, the number of texts. What I heard was that we have 6 and 7 will be considered full. And yet at the last meeting, Gary, I think it was you or somebody else said, we can't do what is being asked for in terms of really doing timely repair because we would have to hire more staff. So I'm confused how even 7 could be considered a full complement when you couldn't possibly meet the need with 7. And then lastly, this is a big thing to throw out, but I think it's time to do it. Senator Seminara asked me, what can we do now? What is the solution now? And what I'm about to say, I'm speaking for all the consumer advocates, and I am actually privileged. I'm the only person who's a consumer advocate who's not an actual consumer. That is to say, I'm not a wheelchair user, but I'm honored to be able to speak about this. And that is that although we have 20 priorities, 15 of which are ours, the last 5 are really the industry's priorities, which we agree with. Although all those are our priorities, really the central thing that's going to fix this, that can happen, because the question is, what can we do? The central thing that can do this are certain of our priorities, basically numbers 1, 5, 6, 8, and 14. I know, Madam Chairman, we're really supposed to talk about the first 3 or 4, but I think it's important to understand the picture, the whole picture here, that from the point of view of consumer advocates, if we could get, as Jonathan said, the maintenance of in-home repair as being the standard, and if we get a requirement specifically of timely assessment and a requirement of timely repair, and that it be those timelines be in enforceable regulations with those mandatory timelines, with a state agency given full statutory authority to promulgate and implement those regulations and enforce them, that would really address the problem. That's priorities 1, 5, 6, 8, and 14. In order to accomplish that, would solve the problem. In order to comply with that, the industry will necessarily have to hire more people. We're not suggesting, I don't think anybody's suggesting that a recommendation of this group should be they have to have certain ratios. But in order to comply with what we've just laid out, if the group agrees to recommend that, then that will have to be necessary, because the reality is, and we'll get the hard data hopefully, the reality is, putting aside prior authorization, putting aside supply chain issues, once those things are done, we're still seeing very long delays. And the reason is there's just not enough staff to meet the need.
And I can answer that quickly. Yes, we track every aspect of the repair process. We can tell you how many days it takes us to get the equipment in. We can tell you how many days it takes to do prior authorization. I can tell you how many days once the equipment hits my dock, it takes for me to deliver it. I can also tell you why we only have 6 or 7 techs allotted, and that's economics. I mean, we lose money in service every day. And a lot of times our goal is just not to lose as much as we're losing today. And that's because my company lost $18 million last year providing service. Okay. Now, I'm not feel sorry for us, but we're a business. We're trying to stay viable. We're trying to take care of people, and we have no incentive. There's no incentive for us to delay an order. We don't get paid until that order is done. Okay. So there's no incentive for me to take longer to do it. We are trying to do it as quickly as we can. Yes, COVID hurt us in a number of ways. It hurt us in labor and it hurt us in supply chain. Now, that's not the only reason this takes a long time. I'm going to agree with you, sir. But we are truly trying to get better. I can't just turn around and hire 10 people, because that would just, I lose money every time I put a key in the van to send a truck out to somebody. We implemented in-shop repair option to get done more quickly. A lot of times we have the right tools and the right products sitting in our warehouse that if the customer comes in, we take care of them. I have a lot of customers that are very happy to come in and get their chair fixed in one visit. So I'm not saying that's 100% effective. I'm not saying that's 100% of people, but I can certainly get you the hard data to back up everything. And we are more than happy to try and get better and do this the right way. But until the reimbursement, and this is, like I said, this is not just a Connecticut issue. And other states are addressing it. Some of them are trying to improve reimbursement. Massachusetts has done many things to try and improve the repair environment there. In fact, they reached out to us proactively to do so. So we're here in good faith.
If I could just respond, the thing about the money you supposedly lose on repairs, you're choosing to be in this business, and in this business, you're providing essential medical equipment that people rely upon for basic functioning. So if you're going to be in the business, that's part of the business, you have to do it. You've said repeatedly now that you've lost $18 million repairs. That's nationally. We have no idea what that means in context. That is to say, what are your total profits, though, for the whole industry? GM loses lots of money, probably hundreds of millions of dollars a year on repairs, on warranty, but they make billions overall. So basically, I think we need, if you're going to throw on that figure of $18 million, we're going to need to see some figures of what your total profits are. It may be that you're losing money on repairs, which is generally the way it goes for manufacturers, but that is what you do. It's the cost of doing business. You don't want to hire extra people, you just said, because of economics, because it's going to cut into profits. But that's really not relevant if you're not providing the basic services that are expected if you provide this kind of equipment. And we should also note that before NewMotion took over and we had the small companies, they were able to provide the service. They did the service. They understood it was their responsibility. So what we're hearing now is excuses because basically hiring more people will eat into your profits. I think if you're going to make that argument, you're going to have to produce your total profits so we can see it. And that would be for both your company and NSM.
Okay, thank you, Sheldon. I think, there's lots of it to me where we're sort of just in talking about this first one, we're really narrowing down to what the problems are. And it's supply chain, it's insurance is a big part of it. And it's compensation or reimbursement for certain services that aren't being provided now. And those are the things that are really in our charge as a task force to look at. So there's a number of people still to talk. Jonathan, do you have anything different to add than what Sheldon said? Because I'd like to get others who haven't spoken the opportunity to speak.
Yeah, I just had a very brief follow-up question for both NewMotion and National City Mobility. For NewMotion, what position was that one opening for? Is that technician or is that office staff?
Technician.
That's for a technician. And there are 6 other technicians in Connecticut?
Yes.
How many office staff to manage phones and emails in the actual office?
We have 41 employees in Connecticut that cover in service and repair. So we have other employees that are corporate, but the ones that are actually customer service, customer focused employees, we have 41, 42.
Okay, so 41 customer service. Okay, and does NSM have any ideas on those
Jonathan and ma'am, Madam Chair, Bev, Diane is on the phone. She's with NSM, so she cannot raise her hand, but she would like to address a couple of those issues, and she has some figures that Michelle asked for. So is it okay if we go to Diane?
Yes, that would be fine. I think. Diane, go ahead.
I appreciate that. I apologize. I'm on vacation and in my car, and I wanted to make sure I attended this and give some stats. So I want to address various points that are brought up. So Jonathan, to answer your question, we have 14 technicians dedicated to Connecticut alone. 8 of those are road. The other rest are in branch. We have 8 CSRs that we incorporated. We are currently fully staffed as of last month. Now, what we have noticed over the past since the pandemic and beforehand, a question came up about that. What is the issue that's causing the back orders? There's been various things. We probably about 25% of our repairs that are on a docket are still being processed from backlog for the past year. Parts of that is related to the supply chain shortages. A lot of it is unfortunately related to joysticks for repairs only. We are scheduling things with new hubs, trying to relate that out. What we did notice after going back and looking at our numbers, another thing too to keep in mind when Senator Sheldon, you brought up about small mom and pops that have been acquired or gone on to business because they could not afford to do that. Both companies have picked up repairs of equipment that we didn't provide to begin with. Over 33% of my repairs right now are not even equipment that I originally provided to the customer. They either had insurance changes or the provider that was giving it to them no longer services them. So that adds another layer to the 2 national companies that you're seeing in the marketplace is taking on more. My business pretty much is 48% repairs. And I wanted to make sure we kind of address the other thing that came up about remote diagnostics. Right now, my success rate on remote diagnostics, and what I mean by success is if a client's able to call in, say, hey, can we look at you remotely, either your laptop, your smartphone, or a tablet? We want to look and see what the problem is. When we look at that, that means, yes, we're able to do that. And then if we're able to determine what the problem is, does not mean it's going to be fixed immediately. If it's just a loose wire, great. But being able to move the order next steps to either cut out, as Gary explained earlier, one step of in person or something differently, we have about a 22% success rate. Now, we have changed some software programs to increase that. So that's we're anticipating that getting a little bit better. We have more dedicated services reps to the remote service diagnostics. So there's things that we've already invested to try to get to that point. Now, before COVID, the question came up on repairs. What was your average service turnaround time? With the amount of PAs and approvals and order of parts, we were at like 35 days. That's not great. I know it's not what people want to hear, but that was the reality. Since COVID, my numbers have doubled. And some of that's related to supply chain, some of that's related to back orders, some of that's related to staffing. Have I been able to keep a full 14 technicians all this past 3 years since COVID and the year before? No, it fluctuates. I am constantly in flux, probably every 2 or 3 months. Something comes up where a CSR leaves, goes to another place, or we lose the person and we have to go back and hire. It's a challenge. It's something that we are totally focused on. We've got new training that's going in across all our branches, not just in Connecticut, on CSRs and technicians and beefing all of that up. But I wanted to make sure I addressed all those points that were brought up by the membership. And in regards to transaction cycle time, that was asked of when someone calls, by the time we get authorization and data, we have all that. And I know, Beverly, we sent you some information already for our Connecticut specific locations, but we can also add that to the next meeting and give you more transaction cycle times by steps for all our repairs in the marketplace. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Diane. That was very helpful. So I'm going to go to Seth and Melissa, and then probably I have some thoughts about wrapping it up and next meeting. So Seth, go ahead.
Yeah, great. And I will be brief. Just wanted to respond directly to Senator Seminara's question. Seth Johnson, I'm with one of the manufacturers represented on the committee. Access to parts due to supply chain is still a problem. In particular, the joystick issue, that's a chip issue. That's an access to chips issue that is still ongoing. It's much better than it was during COVID. From a manufacturing perspective, I can tell you that we do believe that we will have a sufficient amount of chips. Our vendor that we get the joysticks from will have a sufficient amount of chips by the end of this month, and that we should be fully caught up in October on joysticks. But did want you to know that, there are chips not only in joysticks, but in other parts of power wheelchairs that we're talking about. So the supply chain issue is real, and but it is getting better. So just wanted to give you some perspective on that from a manufacturer perspective. Thank you,
Seth. Melissa?
Hi, I'm Melissa Marshall, and thank you for having me here today. Thank you for having me on the task force. I'm glad to be here. Couple of reflections and questions. One I want to emphasize is that someone alluded to earlier that if people with disabilities have transportation, they can get to the shop. Well, if someone who uses their wheelchair for mobility disability has their own car, has their own transportation, they still can't get to the shop. And I just want to highlight that. It's not the same as a car. It's the same as your legs. And I think it's really important for us to understand that. And also, I wanted to talk about a couple of things where I'm hearing that issues arose during COVID. And one of the things I do professionally is work with people with disabilities during public health emergencies like COVID. So I understand COVID was a big deal. COVID's not over. I understand that. But all of these problems occurred before COVID as well. Some of them got exacerbated somewhat. I'm also hearing that because of COVID, and I understand it's been hard to maintain staff. Also, I'm hearing that when you have a full complement of staff, these problems are still happening. And I wonder if there's a way, and this isn't to cast aspersions on the industry, but if there's a way to look at the business model itself, like Sheldon alluded to before, look at the business model, because the business model has to include the cost of repair and maintenance. And it seems like it's not doing that. And that's a fundamental issue that needs to be examined. And I was wondering if someone could talk about that maybe next time. And looking at just the number of 70 days without a wheelchair, or even 35 days without a wheelchair, is just extraordinarily, because that means people are stuck in their beds. They're not working. They're becoming ill. They're getting pressure sores. And I would stand to guess as a lot of those people end up in institutions and in nursing homes where they get sick or sicker and die. And one of the things we learned in COVID is people do and died and can demonstrate, we've been arguing about this for years, die when they're in institutions. So I think those are all things that we need to keep in consideration when we're looking at these timeframes, because they don't work yet. Thank you.
Thank you, Melissa. So it's 1:15 and we've only got through the first one. But let me summarize, because I really want to be respectful of everybody's time. I mean, first, I guess I want to say, I want to thank everybody for, for their honesty. And, there's a million reasons why these things are happening to wheelchair consumers. I think we can all agree that none of them are acceptable. But how do we move forward within the framework that we have to move forward? And the issues I see primarily seem to fall around payer status and staffing and assessment and actual repair. So one of the thoughts I have that might get to, and I'd like people's input on this, is that might get to a lot of these, because there really is quite a bit of overlap, I think, in some of the consumer priorities that Sheldon alluded to, that really come down to timeliness of repair and how that happens. So one of the at the next meeting, as I said, I've asked the insurance and DSS to do a presentation for us, which I think, do people feel like that's a good, seems like that's going to be a big issue to tackle. So, and I did speak to Susan and Ginny at DSSS. So I also think no. Oh, are you guys just making faces at each other over here? I'm just kidding. The other thing I think might be helpful is, rather than sort of throwing a lot of questions back and forth, which isn't really super productive when we're in a hybrid situation like this, it might make sense for the industry to bring some of the data forward around how is it working, maybe even like before COVID, how did COVID impact it, and how is it happening now, and what needs to happen to get to where it's consumers are not waiting for this equipment. So I think that I would ask people to comment, particularly the industry, as I'm asking that of you, if that would make sense, so that we have actual data that we're working on. A lot of this stuff is, anecdotal. And as somebody whose partner is a wheelchair user, I can tell you he's using a 20-year-old wheelchair because Delta Airlines ran over his wheelchair, and he will be using that chair probably for the next 3 to 4 months. So I get it. But does that seem like a next, like for the meeting after October 4th, that we ask the industry to bring that information forward? Does that make sense to people? Yeah, go ahead.
No, Beverly, I think that makes total sense. And I just wanted to say that, last week we sat through a different public hearing for disabilities and access. And that really hit the three of us. We were there, and the other chairs were there also. But that was accessibility for healthcare in wheelchairs to get to the doctor's office. There's a lot of issues that go along with this. I know we're talking about this, but there needs to be more of a comprehensive bill that incorporates the population so that mobility and accessibility is number one.
Yeah, I was at that hearing and it's daunting actually. And not soon enough for people who live in wheelchairs. So so Wayne, why don't you, I assume you're going to comment on my suggestion for a next meeting? Go ahead.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am, I was. Yeah, we will work on the data. As I explained to you a couple of days ago, we were unfortunately under the impression that we were going to cover the items that the consumers and industry had agreed upon. So my apologies for not having some of this data already. It was just my misunderstanding of that, but we will work to gather that too. And I just want to apologize to Melissa for just a second. Melissa, I was the one who mentioned about the vehicles. In no way did I mean to say that it replaces the ability to get somebody around. I'm not saying that. We just want to offer up every option to consumers that can use that. So please accept my apology.
Oh, no need for an apology. And I get that, but I just wanted to clarify and make sure everyone understood that, but no need to apologize. Thank you.
Susan, you have your hand up?
Yes, thank you. And I am happy to, provide some information at the next meeting. I think it's going to be largely reflective of what I said at the beginning of this meeting, because there are different sectors and there are different benefit packages. So as long as the expectation is that I'm going to be speaking in generalities, I'm perfectly, happy to have that conversation, but I just didn't want to, I wanted people's expectations to be in line with what I would assume our comments will be. And again, I think Representative Jay Case made the question in the beginning. It'd be very interesting to know what the state employee account does for this, not Medicaid, but the benefit package that's run out of the state comptroller's office, which is a self-insured plan, to know what they handle or what they cover in regard to some of these provisions, because they are probably the most generous plan that exists in Connecticut. So it would be interesting to know what their coverage benefits look like.
Okay, thank you, Susan. Jonathan and then Sheldon.
Sure, thank you. I also just want to make sure that for the next meeting, when we hear from insurance and perhaps also review the points that Wayne mentioned that we agree on, the last 4 or 5 points of the consumer priorities. It took us most of this meeting to just get through number 1 in depth, and which is why, as consumers, we've really sought to emphasize the need to go through those that we have not yet discussed. 3 weeks ago, we sent out the document with these points asking for comments, and they all said needs further discussion. I think it would be a good idea if we could resend that document again, and for people to provide, both from the industry and from the insurance, in preparation for next meeting, to give detailed feedback on your questions, on your concerns, provide nuance, provide data related to those questions, because otherwise it will take a long time to go through all of these points. And we haven't even yet discussed on the timeliness issue, but all of the 1 through 15 that we have not yet had a chance to discuss with the industry in particular, those really hit at the details. So getting feedback on those before the next meeting would be very helpful. And also the consumers are happy to provide some detailed questions that I think could meet some of the data needs for the task force.
Thank you for that, Jonathan. I think that precisely what you said is why I've suggested that the industry, do a presentation that hits on all of these, so that we have that data. So go ahead, Sheldon.
Yeah, well, I'm not sure what to say in light of Jonathan's question there or comment, but in terms of, I wanted to just suggest in terms of data, because I'm not sure if it's already assumed they'll be providing it. I had suggested earlier today that we get hard data on average wait times for after prior auth is obtained and any parts have been received by the company. So we know what the real delays are that are attributable to the company and not these other things. I think it'd be really helpful to have that. And I'm just asking whether that's a reasonable thing to ask the industry to produce both companies. The other thing, the other data that it's based upon the really helpful input we just got from Diane from NSM. She stated that they have 14 techs, whereas New Motion has 6 and is striving to get 7 and is calling that a full complement. My understanding is that NSM has only 30% of the market and New Motion has 70%. So given those lopsidedly different tech numbers, it'd be really good to know if that's correct. I mean, maybe someone can answer that right now. What is the market share of the two companies in Connecticut? I think that, but if you're not going to answer it now, I think it'd be very helpful to have that. And my understanding is there's one tiny supplier from Agawam who maybe gives, a tiny fraction of 1%, but basically these two companies cover it all. And then the last suggestion for data would be, since staffing is such a huge issue, do either the companies or Wayne have any standards that are used in the industry for what are appropriate ratios as between the ratio of customers who use CRT and the number of techs you would need for that size population? Again, there's a huge difference between NSM and New Motion already, if I'm right, that the New Motion has 70% of the business. So I think that would be very helpful kinds of data to provide if others agree it's reasonable.
Thanks, Sheldon. Yeah, that is actually very helpful. And I think that those are sort of hitting on the main points. So, so sort of trying to wrap up here, what I'm going to, I just want to sort of, I like to sort of do this by consensus and have as much clarity and transparency that the October 4th meeting will be DSS and the insurance industry. And I think Jim Carson is here from the Department of Insurance. There might be information, Jim, that you could lend to that as well. But why don't do I have that right, Jim? Are you Department of Insurance? Yes. Okay.
That is correct. Yes, I'm here.
So I'll call you.
That is correct. Yes.
Okay. I think that the Department of Insurance should be part of that for sure, since we're so many different payer status. And then the meeting after October 4th would be the presentation from the industry on the data. And I am happy to, if people want to email me questions that they have, let's keep the questions to ones that are really going to, that we really need to help move the ball forward from both sides. And I'm happy to put that together to help the industry sort of round out what would be helpful to this group. So I would ask the state agencies to participate in that and things that you think might be helpful to hear. So, so with that said, are there any final comments, questions, concerns while we're here? Okay, well, I want to thank you again. I think we're all on a learning curve as to how to do this with such a big group. So I want people to know I always have an open door and I want to hear from you. People have my cell phone, my email, and I want this to be a very inclusive and transparent process. So, so with that, thank you everybody for your time, and we'll see you at the next meeting on the 4th.